North Korea was supposed to be contained through decades of sanctions and diplomatic isolation. However, on March 12, 2026, Pyongyang did something that shattered every assumption about Kim Jong-un's strategic calculations. Intelligence satellites captured North Korean cargo vessels unloading not food aid or medical supplies, but 500,000 artillery shells and 24 KN-23 short-range ballistic missile systems directly onto Russian soil at the port of Vladivostok. This was not a covert arms deal conducted in shadows. This was an open declaration that Kim Jong-un had chosen sides in the greatest geopolitical confrontation since the Cold War. Within 72 hours of these shipments crossing into Russian territory, the Pentagon activated emergency protocols not seen since the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. What you are about to learn will fundamentally change how you understand the Pacific security architecture and the cascading consequences now racing toward an inevitable collision point. The images you are about to see on your screens document the moment when North Korea transformed from isolated pariah state into active belligerent in a global conflict. What you see is not speculation or satellite imagery of questionable origin. The footage shows geolocated verification from multiple independent sources, including Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force surveillance aircraft, South Korean intelligence assessments, and United States Indo-Pacific Command monitoring systems. In the images that will appear on your screen shortly, you will witness the systematic loading of military cargo that represents the largest arms transfer from North Korea to any foreign power in the regime's history. But that is not the most shocking detail. There are three critical developments that transform this arms deal into an existential crisis requiring immediate Pentagon response. The first involves North Korean military engineers now operating inside Russian territory. The second concerns the specific weapons systems being transferred and their implications for Taiwan. The third represents a classified intelligence assessment that caused emergency meetings in Washington, Tokyo, and Seoul within 6 hours of confirmation. We will explain this in the later parts of the video. Now we must look at exactly what happened on that cold morning of March 12th. According to reports from the Institute for the Study of War and the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the North Korean cargo operation began at 0400 hours local time at Vladivostok's commercial port facilities. The location you see on the screen is Pier 7, a massive deepwater facility normally reserved for container shipping operations. 3 North Korean vessels designated as the Chongchon-gang class heavy cargo ships entered Russian territorial waters without the usual concealment measures Pyongyang typically employs for weapons transfers. Russian Port Authority documents leaked to Radio Free Asia show that Moscow had cleared the entire pier section for exclusive North Korean use for a period of 168 hours, effectively creating a North Korean military zone on Russian soil. Ukrainian intelligence services working with Western partners documented the systematic offloading of weapons crates marked with Korean People's Army designations. The scale becomes clear when you examine the numbers. According to German intelligence reports shared with NATO partners, the initial March 12th shipment included 500,000 rounds of 152mm artillery ammunition, precisely the caliber that Russian forces consume at a rate of 20,000 rounds per day in their Ukraine operations. The mathematics reveals a stark reality. This single shipment provides Russia with 25 days of sustained artillery operations at current consumption rates. But the artillery shells represent only the visible portion of this strategic realignment. Defense Ministry announcements from South Korea released on March 14th confirmed through signal intelligence that North Korea had transferred 24 complete KN-23 short-range ballistic missile systems to Russian control. For those unfamiliar with this weapons designation, the KN-23 represents North Korea's most advanced tactical ballistic missile, capable of striking targets at ranges up to 690 kilometers with reported accuracy of less than 50 meters circular error probable. The missile employs solid fuel propulsion, eliminating the lengthy fueling procedures that make liquid fuel systems vulnerable to preemptive strikes. The KN-23 can execute pull-up maneuvers during terminal phase, complicating interception by Patriot air defense batteries or equivalent systems. The transfer of 24 complete systems means Russia has acquired 96 to 120 missiles based on standard North Korean deployment configurations of 4 to 5 missiles per transporter erector launcher. Military intelligence assessments indicate these systems were not transferred for use in Ukraine, where their range exceeds tactical requirements. The targeting envelope of 690 kilometers from Russian Far East positions encompasses critical Japanese infrastructure including Sapporo, portions of Hokkaido, and approaches to the Tsugaru Strait that separates Honshu from Hokkaido. This tactical capability creates immediate strategic consequences that cascade far beyond the bilateral Russia-North Korea relationship. When you combine North Korea's willingness to transfer advanced weapons systems with Russia's desperate need for artillery ammunition and precision strike capabilities, the equation produces a force multiplication effect that shifts regional power calculations. The immediate battlefield result in Ukraine will be sustained Russian artillery operations through spring 2026, when ammunition shortages were expected to force operational pauses. This ammunition supply leads to continued pressure on Ukrainian defensive positions in Donetsk and Zaporizhia oblasts. Continued artillery operations enable Russian forces to maintain current offensive tempo rather than transitioning to defensive consolidation. This operational advantage creates strategic breathing space for Moscow to rebuild depleted mechanized forces while maintaining pressure on Kyiv. But the truly shocking detail is not these artillery shells or even the ballistic missile systems. The game-changing element involves what came with those weapons. According to preliminary data from Signals Intelligence Collection, approximately 500 North Korean military engineers and technicians accompanied the weapons shipments into Russian territory. These are not advisors or observers conducting training missions. Radio Free Europe reporters verified through independent sources that these personnel carry specialized expertise in two critical domains. The first group consists of tunnel warfare engineers, specialists in the underground fortification techniques North Korea has perfected over 7 decades of preparing for conflict with South Korea. North Korea operates an estimated 6,000 kilometers of military tunnels beneath the demilitarized zone, representing the most extensive underground military infrastructure in human history. These engineers bring knowledge of rapid tunnel construction, underground logistics networks, and subterranean ammunition storage that Russian forces desperately need after Ukrainian strikes systematically destroyed above-ground depot facilities across occupied territories. The second group represents even more concerning development. These are missile guidance specialists, the technical experts who maintain and operate North Korea's increasingly sophisticated ballistic missile arsenal. Their presence in Russia suggests not merely weapons transfer but operational integration of North Korean missile capabilities into Russian military command structures. The geopolitical implications extend far beyond the immediate Russia-Ukraine theater into the broader architecture of Pacific security and great power competition. This North Korea-Russia military partnership represents the formation of what intelligence analysts now term the Pyongyang-Moscow axis, a strategic alignment that fundamentally alters the security equation in Northeast Asia. China watches this development with deeply conflicted calculations. Beijing has historically positioned itself as North Korea's essential patron, the power that prevents regime collapse through economic support and diplomatic protection. The trade volume between China and North Korea reached $2.4 billion in 2025, according to Chinese customs data, representing approximately 95% of North Korea's total external trade. China's influence over Pyongyang has been the cornerstone of Beijing's leverage in regional security discussions and its primary tool for managing North Korean provocations that might trigger broader conflicts threatening Chinese interests. The North Korea-Russia partnership directly challenges this Chinese monopoly on North Korean dependency. When North Korea demonstrates it possesses alternative partners willing to provide economic benefits and strategic cover, Beijing's leverage diminishes proportionally. This creates a situation reminiscent of the Sino-Soviet split of the 1960s, when ideological and strategic differences fractured what appeared to be monolithic communist bloc solidarity. The picture we see today carries echoes of that earlier fragmentation, but with roles reversed. Russia now offers North Korea what China increasingly hesitates to provide: unconditional support for military adventurism and weapons development programs that Beijing views as dangerously destabilizing. Moscow has no interest in Korean peninsula stability. Russian strategic calculations prioritize anything that diverts American attention and resources away from Ukraine and toward Pacific contingencies. A North Korea emboldened by Russian support and equipped with Russian technology transfer serves Putin's interests perfectly, even as it undermines Chinese regional management strategies. Japan and South Korea face the immediate consequences of this axis formation. The integration of Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and most recently South Korea into NATO's Ukraine support mechanisms has created what Moscow and Pyongyang characterize as hostile encirclement by American vassals. North Korea's state media, in broadcasts monitored on March 15th, explicitly cited South Korean ammunition transfers to Ukraine totaling over 300,000 artillery shells as justification for Pyongyang's support of Russia. This represents classic hybrid warfare rhetoric, the construction of grievance narratives that justify escalatory actions. South Korea's annual artillery shell production capacity exceeds 200,000 rounds according to defense industry analyses, making Seoul a critical ammunition supplier for Ukrainian forces facing Russian artillery superiority. North Korea's decision to directly arm Russia creates a proxy conflict dynamic where Korean Peninsula rivals supply opposite sides of the Ukraine war, effectively extending that European conflict into Northeast Asian geopolitics. The human dimension of this crisis manifests in the populations now living under increased threat of military conflict. South Korean civilians in Seoul, a city of 10 million people located just 50 kilometers from the demilitarized zone, face renewed artillery threat from North Korean systems that could devastate the capital within minutes of conflict outbreak. The expression you see in crisis preparation footage from Seoul civil defense drills is not panic, but the grim recognition that their city functions as a hostage to North Korean artillery positioned in hardened mountain shelters immune to preemptive strikes. Japanese civilians in Hokkaido and northern Honshu now fall within range of the KN-23 systems Russia has acquired, creating attack vectors that Japanese self-defense forces must account for in defensive planning. The psychological weight of living under expanded ballistic missile threat creates sustained stress that shapes political attitudes and policy preferences in Japan's pacifist-leaning society. Inside North Korea itself, the weapons transfers to Russia represent both opportunity and risk for Kim Jong-un's regime survival calculations. The economic benefits flow in multiple forms. Russia reportedly paid for the artillery shells in currencies North Korea desperately needs, providing hard currency that sanctions have made nearly impossible to acquire through legitimate channels. Russian energy shipments to North Korea increased 18% in the first quarter of 2026, according to Shipping Manifest analysis, providing the refined petroleum products that power North Korean industry and military vehicles. Food supplies from Russia's agricultural exports help address chronic North Korean food insecurity that creates internal stability threats for the regime, but Kim Jong-un has calculated that these benefits outweigh the risks of deeper involvement in Russia's Ukraine conflict and the retaliatory measures this involvement will certainly trigger. This brings us to the most crucial, darkest point: the emergency protocols the Pentagon activated in response to North Korean arms transfers. On March 14, 2026, exactly 48 hours after confirmation of the Vladivostok shipments, United States Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin convened the Nuclear Posture Review Committee in classified emergency session. This committee, which includes the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the commander of United States Strategic Command, and senior officials from the National Security Council, has authority to recommend changes to America's nuclear force deployment and alert postures. According to leaked protocols reported by Politico, the committee recommended and the president approved the forward deployment of additional Ohio-class ballistic missile submarines to the Western Pacific Theater. These submarines, each carrying 20 Trident II D5 submarine-launched ballistic missiles with multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicle capabilities, represent America's most survivable nuclear deterrent. The deployment signals to Pyongyang and Moscow that the United States views the North Korea-Russia axis as requiring enhanced nuclear deterrence measures. Simultaneously, United States Indo-Pacific Command activated what defense planners term Enhanced Theater Missile Defense Integration Protocols. This involved the deployment of 2 additional terminal high-altitude area defense batteries to South Korea, supplementing the existing THAAD installation at Seongju that has operated since 2017. Japan received accelerated delivery of SM-3 Block 2IA interceptor missiles for its Aegis-equipped destroyers, enhancing Japanese capabilities to intercept ballistic missiles during mid-course flight phase. The United States Air Force forward-deployed B-52H Stratofortress bombers to Andersen Air Force Base in Guam, positioning these nuclear-capable strategic bombers within striking range of both North Korean and Russian Far East targets. These are not routine training rotations. Military analysts confirm these represent crisis response deployments designed to demonstrate American resolve while providing actual combat capabilities for rapid response scenarios. The economic warfare dimension escalated in parallel with military preparations. The United States Treasury Department, working with Japanese and South Korean counterparts, announced on March 16 the most comprehensive sanctions package targeting North Korea's weapons export network in the past decade. The measures designated 37 North Korean entities and 24 individuals involved in arms manufacturing, procurement, and transportation networks. More significantly, the sanctions included secondary measures targeting any financial institutions worldwide that process transactions related to North Korean weapons sales. This creates a choice point for Chinese banks that have historically provided the dollar clearing services North Korea requires for international trade. Beijing must now decide whether to enforce these sanctions and lose influence with Pyongyang or ignore them and face potential exclusion from dollar-denominated international financial systems. The coming months will determine whether this crisis represents a temporary alignment of convenience or the formation of a durable authoritarian axis capable of sustained coordination against Western interests. Putin's strategy currently depends on outlasting Western resolve and exploiting political divisions in Washington, Berlin, and Paris. He trusts that electoral changes might produce governments more amenable to negotiated settlements favorable to Moscow. North Korean support provides Russia the ammunition and weapon systems necessary to sustain military operations through 2026 while awaiting these political shifts. Kim Jong-un's strategy depends on Russian protection from international pressure and technology transfers that advance North Korea's weapons programs. Pyongyang particularly desires Russian satellite technology, advanced submarine designs, and intercontinental ballistic missile re-entry vehicle improvements that could make North Korean nuclear threats more credible. This mutual dependency could evolve into sustained strategic partnership if both parties achieve their immediate objectives. But the West possesses tools to disrupt this axis before it fully consolidates. The key vulnerability lies in China's position. Beijing cannot accept a North Korea that acts independently of Chinese influence, particularly if that independence leads to conflicts threatening Chinese economic interests in Northeast Asia. The United States and its allies have begun subtle diplomatic messaging to Beijing emphasizing that unchecked North Korea-Russia cooperation damages Chinese interests more than it harms Western positions. If China can be convinced to pressure North Korea to limit Russia's support, the axis fragments before achieving full operational integration. The economic pressure points remain significant. North Korea's economy cannot survive without either Chinese or Russian support. If both powers face costs for enabling Pyongyang's weapons exports, one or both might recalculate the benefits of this partnership. The sanctions architecture now being constructed will test whether economic coercion can modify North Korean behavior when applied with genuine enforcement commitment. The military balance in Northeast Asia has shifted measurably in the past 2 weeks. Every KN-23 missile in Russian possession represents one more target South Korean and Japanese missile defenses must account for in contingency planning. Every North Korean artillery shell fired in Ukraine is one round not stockpiled for potential Korean Peninsula conflict, but every dollar Russia pays North Korea funds future weapons development that ultimately targets American allies. The strategic calculus has become a complex equation where actions in Europe directly impact Pacific security and vice versa. This is the global entanglement that defense planners have warned about for years, the scenario where conflicts in separated theaters reinforce and amplify each other through alliance networks and weapons flows. Only time will tell whether the Pentagon's emergency protocols succeed in deterring further North Korean escalation, or whether we are witnessing the early stages of a broader authoritarian coordination that will define the next decade of geopolitical competition. The steel wall of American extended deterrence that has protected South Korea and Japan for 7 decades now faces testing from multiple directions simultaneously. North Korea probes from one angle while China threatens Taiwan from another and Russia destabilizes Europe from a third. The question is whether American power can meet all 3 challenges simultaneously or whether adversaries have correctly identified the moment of American overextension. What are your thoughts on this unprecedented North Korea-Russia military partnership and its implications for Pacific security? Do you think economic sanctions can effectively disrupt this axis before it fully consolidates? Don't forget to share your thoughts on this topic in the comments section. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like our video. The Korean Peninsula has become the unexpected pivot point where European and Pacific conflicts converge into single strategic crisis. What began as arms shipments to Vladivostok has evolved into a fundamental challenge to the post-World War II security architecture that has prevented great power war for 8 decades. North Korea crossed the red line when it chose to become active participant rather than isolated observer in global power competition. The Pentagon has activated emergency protocols because American strategists recognize that this moment requires decisive response or risks cascading into uncontrollable escalation. The coming months will reveal whether deterrence holds or whether we are watching the final moves before the carefully managed tensions of the past 70 years collapse into open conflict that no one can contain. Presented by TGN. Thank you for choosing us.